Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. I was delighted to hear that it's going to be a question and answer, because I think it's so good if we're going to have an interactive discussion. My name is Fionnuala Quinlan. I think it was the Fionnuala bit that was throwing you, right? So my name is Fionnuala Quinlan, and I am the ambassador of Ireland to Kenya. And I arrived in Kenya about 3 months ago. So it's been a really, really interesting 3 months, I have to say. Trying to get up to speed on the business climate, politics, everything, but also try just to, learn a little bit about Kenya and your people and so forth. And that's just been a great experience. We've had a really warm welcome. I'm with my husband and we have a small son. So we found that certainly people had told me before I came how much Kenyan people love kids. And that has certainly proved to be the point. So my background, I have worked for our Ministry for Foreign Affairs for 10 years. My most recent posting before coming here was in Boston, where I was head of our mission in Boston, Consul General, it was a consulate. And that was a great post. Boston is the most Irish city in the US, and that is saying something, because the Irish, there's 33 million people in the US who claim Irish heritage. So that's basically 1 in 10 Americans. But in Boston, the ratio is 1 to 4. So that was a great post, really enjoyed it. It's a very interesting part of the world. But my previous posts had brought me to East Africa regularly. So I worked in the press division. I headed up our press section for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And that brought me very regularly to East Africa, accompanying ministers and journalists to visit the countries with which we have particularly strong relationships in East Africa. So I had been to Kenya previously, not for very long, but I was very keen to come back, and when I had the opportunity to come and serve here, it's going to be a 4-year posting, I was delighted. So maybe just to tell you a little bit about the embassy and the work that we do, and maybe even to go back a little bit further, I guess, and talk about the missionaries who came here, right? Because a lot of people, when I meet them, when I talk to people about being the Irish ambassador, they mentioned that they were taught by an Irish brother or nun, or maybe somebody in their family was treated at a health clinic that was run by the missionaries. So the fact that we had missionaries laying the trail for us, decades ago, has really, I think, smoothed the path for me and my colleagues. I'm joined here by 2 colleagues, by the way, Joy and Kenneth, sitting in the front, but has really smoothed our path in terms of developing bilateral relations. So our mission is primarily a trade and economic mission. We really want to grow trade and business with Kenya. But the way that we've chosen to orient ourselves really looks at and draws from the similarities between our 2 countries, because there really are quite a lot, actually. Ireland was colonized by the UK they were with us for 800 years, right? We were a very agriculture-based society for a long time, subsistence agriculture. Quite a poor country. We had many of our peoples emigrated. We had a famine in the mid-19th century that saw our population drop from, over 8 million. It fell actually to about 3 million at one point. We had, 1 million people died, 1 million people emigrated. So, I suppose, not to say, obviously, I don't think Kenya had suffered that kind of a crisis, but just to say that I suppose there's an understanding of a development journey that was often very difficult for people, and that we're both still on, right? So over the last 60 or 70 years, 50 years, I guess 60 years, Ireland has put a huge amount of work and resources into educating our people and becoming much more open and globalized. So now we went from a country that had a famine, as I mentioned, in the mid-19th century, to a country that exports 20 times what we eat ourselves. So we produce enough food for 20 times our population, and we export it all over the world. We have 9 of the top 10 global tech companies, pharmaceutical companies located there. Some of that has got to do with a favorable tax regime, very transparent, open, stable tax regime. But actually, if you talk to businesses, as I did a huge amount in Boston, because there's a huge US investment in Ireland, more than anything what they talk about is our very educated and very productive workforce. So like Kenya as well, I think, Ireland invested a lot in education, and really people prioritise that in their families. So that again, I think, is something that we share. So we've done a lot of work, in terms of, as I mentioned, opening up our country to the global economy, obviously on education and on agriculture. So it made sense, I guess, then when we came to Kenya and saw that these are real areas of focus for your country as well. If you look at the 2030, Vision 2030, or the Big Four agenda, we decided, how can we best support Kenya and develop our bilateral relations? And really, our program here and our work here is around sharing the lessons that we have learned, and hoping that Kenya will learn from the good things that happened for us, and also of course, as is always very important, learn from some of the mistakes we made as well, right? So our program is over 3 pillars. The first is private sector development. So in that sphere, we provide support to provided support to Keninvest to open their one-stop centre for investors. So I toured that recently, and it's very impressive. So if you have an investor coming in from overseas wishing to invest in Kenya, as so many do, here's one place where you can come. You can get tax advice. You can get information on immigration. It's not only information, in fact, you can apply. They have people from, yes, exactly, across all of the kind of relevant queries that a potential investor would have. And that was a learning. We have an organisation at home called the IDA, which is our principal agency charged with attracting foreign direct investment into Ireland. They're recognised as one of the best in the world. I mean, it's partly thanks to them. We have those 9 out of 10 tech companies and pharma companies and so forth. So some people who'd worked with them before provided advice to Keninvest, and that was something that we sponsored. We also work with KEPSA, and that's around supporting a business hub for, again, for businesses to take advantage of opportunities. But we have a particular stream of funding to KEPSA that's around supporting women entrepreneurs. Because of course we know, a lot of the small companies are headed by women, but oftentimes, just making that jump up, can be a challenge. So that's really what our funding to KEPSA is designed to really empower and help women. And in fact, I'm speaking at a KEPSA event on Friday that is around, I think it's titled, overcoming fear and failure and things. So, it's very real issues actually, and good to have a forum in which people can really talk about that. So then if I move to agriculture, again, I mentioned, we went from these tiny plots of land to now being, exporting a huge amount, being really recognised for our kind of farm to fork traceability route, grass-fed, really high quality. So in Kenya, we are working in Nyandarua at the moment on a program with, I think it's about 2,000 farmers, supporting them to develop, or rather to use certified seeds, to develop certified seeds and really build on, to try to improve their crops. And we're seeing some real advantages there, because that's such a huge issue, right? Proper inputs, and that's been a challenge. And we have an Irish company working, and your agricultural agencies are deeply involved in that, so it's very much our government agencies working with your government agencies, along with some private sector involvement. We've just launched a really exciting program. It's a Catalytic Fund. It's not huge money. It's about 200,000 euros, but it'll go to 6 cooperatives that are recognised. 6 cooperatives of course, in the agriculture sphere, who really, are recognised as having good governance, having, everything right in place, but just needing that little cash injection to get them to the next level. And within that program, we're just about to finalise it actually at the moment and launch it. We're looking particularly for co-ops that are using climate smart innovations and that are headed, or at least have a strong representation of women. And then the final one we're working on dairy as well, and that's quite an exciting program that's around genetics and forage systems. So I won't go into all the technical details because that might not be what you're here for this evening.
A lot of it though, especially when you said about working with KEPSA. I was wondering, does that money trickle down to the businesses, or do you leave it at the KEPSA level, and any assistance that you give them, does it trickle down to the actual businesses?
That particular fund, it's not huge money, and what we've tasked them with using it for is to run programs to support women entrepreneurs and business leaders.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really around the mentoring piece.
So what you would be looking for is the outcomes, what they've done with the money, what are the achievements?
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. We're going to get on with the questions, and we had one in particular that seems to pique everybody's interest, and that is studying in Ireland and what that entails for a Kenyan wanting to go there.
Yeah, well, we have some very good news on that front, actually. I mentioned earlier that we've invested a lot in education. Of course, we have some of the world's top-class universities. And also, so there's a range of options available from the really top-class universities down to more institutes of technology that are also excellent. So previously, visas had to be sent back to Dublin for processing, which, created a lot of uncertainty for people. Because, if you're waiting 10 to 12 weeks for a response, that's a long time. We now have sanctioned to process visas for education right here in Nairobi. So somebody in our embassy does that. And that means that the waiting time now for students looking to Ireland is reduced to about 3 weeks. So that's a very big difference.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But Ireland, from what we hear, students just have such a great experience in Ireland. It's quite small. Our cities are very friendly. They're very diverse. You have 15% of Ireland now, the population is born outside the island of Ireland. They're foreigners from all over the world.
Okay.
So great culture, great music, like the Kenyans, right? We love music, we love to sit together and eat, We're not as good dancers, that's something we've got to work on.
You can borrow that from us.
Maybe you can come, exactly, you can come and give some lessons. But seriously, we do actually have a form of dancing called Irish dancing that's quite famous, but it's rather more stiff than Kenyan dancing. So generally the experience we hear is very positive. I think from a price per point, it's competitive. From the perspective of actually in your future careers and so forth, the degrees and that are very highly regarded. Our masters are also usually 1 year. I'm not sure in Kenya, are they usually 1 or 2?
1 year.
1 year also, okay.
Yeah. In relation to similar universities, similar institutions in the rest of the world, their pricing, is it better? Because we know the quality is good, but can we get a little bit of, a price range that's, friendly to the market?
Yeah, I think we're competitive, certainly. I don't know the exact price now, and I suppose it depends on different universities and so forth.
Yeah.
But I do think we are competitively priced.
Okay.
And if people are interested, we can certainly direct, to some resources where they can have a look and find out exactly
a bit more information.
Yeah.
All right. And then trading partnerships between Ireland and Kenya, you alluded a little bit to that, but if we are looking for anybody who has some produce that they feel they would want to be taken to that side, or maybe even importing from Ireland to here, where would you say would be the starting point?
Well, the first thing to say is our two-way trade and investment at the moment is in the region of 150 million per annum in goods and services. So definitely, good, it's growing about 20% a year, but certainly room for growth, right? And that's an area that we're working a lot on within the embassy. But just to say, Ireland is part of the European Union, right? So we're part of the single market. So the same conditions exist for Kenyans exporting to Ireland as they do for Kenyans exporting to France, Germany, or anywhere else. And actually, it's quite a favourable regime at the moment because Kenyan goods go duty-free to the EU. So that's certainly, I think that's a major advantage. Yeah. At the moment, there's an economic partnership agreement that's in the works that involves countries within East Africa, other countries within East Africa. It's been signed. So Kenya has signed and ratified it, I should say. Some of the other countries haven't. So between now and when that comes into effect, there is duty-free access that's been protected for goods.
How long do you see that taking? I know that's a Kenyan issue, but you envision it taking how long?
I can't answer that really because it depends on when do Tanzania and Burundi and
no for the Kenyan. True.
So it's an East African. There's 6 countries involved, but Kenya has pushed forward very strongly on it really, and is very keen to
see it go
into. So you're the leader of the pack there.
Yeah, but if you're only as strong as you. Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see how that comes up. Then I'll ask There are quite a few areas you're looking at, but you mostly seem to be focusing on agriculture. Is that your main sector of interest, and are there others? Because there are people from tourism here, construction, and
Yeah. No, I mean, definitely. So just to say as well, we have about 15 Irish companies that have already invested in Kenya, and they're across a whole range of sectors. So we have, yes, agri-tech and agri-food, because that's just Kenya has a big agricultural economy as well, right? It's a third of your GDP. So obviously that's where there's a lot of opportunities. But also construction. Our construction firms are very engaged here, engineering firms.
Okay.
We have a number of pharmaceutical firms. So you may be aware of the company Maidawa.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an Irish company. There's a couple of genetics companies as well that are already here and investing. But just to say, I mentioned earlier we're trying to grow it. So there's a couple of initiatives that you might be interested in learning about. And one is we're bringing a trade mission. The very first ministerial-led trade mission is coming to Kenya in November. We're hoping to have about 30 Irish companies coming over. And again, in the sectors that I mentioned, obviously agri-tech will be big, but also construction, ICT, pharmaceutical, and so forth. Education, we're going to have, and there's going to be a strong education component of that. We have between 4 and 6 of our universities committed to coming over, and actually we're going to host an education fair in November. So that'll be a nice opportunity as well for people who are considering Ireland to come along and maybe meet people from the universities. And I'm sure you must have some kind of a mailing list or...
I do.
With members.
Yes.
So what we can do, I mean, we can make a note and maybe share details of that education fair once we tie down exactly the venue and so forth. But no, so there's all those sectors that we're really engaged in. And just to say, Kenya obviously is also exporting to Ireland, of course. I mean, they're coffee, tea, some other agricultural products mostly. Again, there is definitely room for growth, I think, there.
Okay. Tourism?
Tourism?
Anything to do with tourism?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Irish people do come to Kenya for tourism, of course. Why would you not, right? Beautiful safaris, fabulous mountains, beautiful coastline. But we are very keen, of course, to increase tourism to Ireland as well.
Okay.
The other thing I should just quickly mention, apart from the trade mission, is that we have a very active Business Ireland-Kenya network.
Yes.
Joy, who's sitting here in the front row, is actually, she's basically makes it all happen. So anybody who is interested in considering joining should talk to Joy. But actually, we have an event coming up on the 24th of September. It's an evening networking event. It's open to non-members as well. So if you just wanted to come along and maybe dip your toe in the market, it's 1,000 shillings per person. But if you bring a friend, it's still 1,000, so it's 500 each. And it's at Dusit. It's at Dusit 2, right? Starting about 6 o'clock on the 24th of September.
Okay.
So again, maybe we can be in touch with Irene and send the details.
That one would be beneficial.
Yeah, and that's
absolutely.
Every month we have business breakfasts. Like we're
every
planning
month,
the one.
Even you didn't tell me that.
Yeah, so we have business breakfasts. Oh no, sorry, they're not every month. They're every 3 months. But we have events like pretty regularly, right? Different kinds of events. Okay. But we have breakfast every 3 months, and they're the one we've coming up now is around skills and education.
Okay.
And we've got some great speakers. So.
Oh, lovely. I wanted to talk about the double taxation, Kenya and Ireland. How is that coming along?
It's coming along well, actually. Yeah, absolutely. So, again, I should have mentioned that in terms of growing trade and investment between our two countries. The double taxation agreement, I mean, we had members of the Kenya Revenue Authority go to Ireland.
Okay.
We had our revenue officials come here. So we're now in the final stages of closing that agreement. It's with both authorities for sign-off. But we're certainly ambitious that we will have that ready to be signed off on that November trade mission.
Okay.
Yeah, so lots happening. That's
happening between now and
November.
Okay. And the last one, mentorship for businesses. There's some very young businesses among members here, and they were wondering, you have done, your country has done quite a bit of this for perhaps much longer than we have. Do you have any mentorship programs that help, not necessarily money, but just help grow the company skills to the next level. Yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, the one thing I would say is the KEPSA support, obviously, is for
Yes.
mentorship, but that's specifically for women entrepreneurs. I mean, I would say consider the Business Ireland Kenya network, because that's a very, like, we don't have a formal mentoring program.
Yeah.
But I guess with the Business Ireland Kenya network, we've got some very, very experienced business people in there. And that network really is all about helping and supporting each other, right? And recognizing opportunities and making connections and really helping everyone involved in business, be it in Ireland or Kenya, to grow and thrive. So I would think that would be a good opportunity.
A good platform to start off. Okay. And I'm going to now open it up for questions.
Easy ones, please.
I told them difficult ones, so somewhere in the middle. Okay.
Okay, my name is Ruth. I have 2 questions. I'll make it quick.
All right.
Okay. So the first question is, I'm in tech personally in my career, and like you mentioned, Dublin is key in terms of the tech companies. We have like 10 of the largest tech companies there. And considering East Africa, Kenya is based at the Silicon Valley for both East and Western Africa. So is there how can we leverage on both the expertise in Ireland and Kenya? Because we've had like hackathons based from other tech companies happening in Nairobi. So is there something that the Irish government or through the consulate and the embassy here, we're going to foster more of the tech innovations in the country? Question 2, I'm not sure you have clearance to talk about this, but with Brexit and all the communication we have around that, do we see a ripple effect with whatever the decision is going to be? Do we see a ripple effect in terms of economic trade in Kenya?
Okay, hi, my name is Vicky. I was just interested because the previous meeting we had earlier this year, there was something that you mentioned that we felt was relevant to food security in Kenya. The previous ambassador mentioned something about Irish farming, potatoes. Like, I can't remember exactly what it was. So he had mentioned he would like maybe introduce the same technology or give some direction towards that. Yeah, because it's one of the staple foods there, and yeah, it would help with the food security in Kenya.
My name is Gerald. I'm in construction, but I have a keen interest on agriculture. And you mentioned that you're working with farmers in Nyandarua County, and you also mentioned something about your Irish dairy industry. So my question would be, having worked with the farmers in the county of Nyandarua, what would be some of the things that you've observed from that county or from the Kenyan farming community in general that makes us not as competitive or hinders us to have food security in our country?
Comfortable here. All right. Settle in. Yeah. Sounds like we've got a lively audience. Very good, very good. That's the best kind of audience. So, Drew, just to come back to your question about the hackathon, brilliant you're working in tech, and that, of course, sometimes when I look in Nairobi and you see Oracle and Dell and Google and so forth, and so many cranes and so much construction underway, I think, exactly, not unlike Dublin, right? In terms of something like a hackathon, the embassy hasn't worked on something like that to date. But that's, again, not to say that it isn't something that we might be interested in being involved in. To date, we have a very clear policy, and it's around agriculture, private sector, and education. But I think it's a really good idea to try to build some partnerships between some of those tech firms. And a good place to start with that, actually, might be to have a tech focus at one of our Business Ireland Kenya breakfasts, because even some of the Irish people who are resident here are also working in the tech field here. So, just to get them in, to come in and talk about what are the similarities, and maybe use that as a jumping off point for, possibly looking at some ways that we can work together. It took longer than I expected for Brexit to come up. What was that, about 20 minutes?
I was leaving it for last,
yes. You're right in a way, of course, I can talk about Brexit, obviously, until the cows come home from an Irish perspective. That's kind of my job at the moment. But from a UK perspective, of course, I can't speak on behalf of the UK government. So what we know at the moment is that the UK is due to leave the European Union on the 31st of October. That's what's going to happen unless there is an agreement. Or a second referendum, yeah. That doesn't seem too likely at the moment, I have to say. But I mean, who knows, right? There's been a lot of things, there's been a lot of movement and a lot of engagement at the Parliament and so forth. So I can't guess the outcome. All I can tell you is that Ireland really, really wants there to be a deal, because them leaving without a deal, obviously it'll be damaging for everybody. But it'll be very damaging for Ireland. It'll be very damaging for our economy, and there's a real risk to the peace process in Ireland that, was hard fought for over many, many years. We've had 20 years of peace on the island now. But if and when Brexit happens, that land border between the Republic of Ireland, which is like, say, the southern 3/4 of the island, and the Northern Ireland, which remains part of the UK, will become the only land border of the UK with the EU. So there's an issue there, of course. We have the single market, which means goods and services can travel freely within the EU, but they can't travel freely into a third country, which, is what, Northern Ireland as part of the UK will become. So the agreement that was negotiated over 2 years had something called the backstop, which is basically an insurance policy. And it says, until we can come up with some mechanisms to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, the EU will remain in a customs union, or the UK rather will remain in a customs union. And that's a key sticking point in the current negotiations. So that's a really, that had been agreed by the UK, and now it's, the UK are saying it, the UK government is saying that can't stick. So the danger is, if there's a border back on the island of Ireland, then, you end up kind of reverting back to a situation of violence. And like both governments, of course, really want to avoid that. Because the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed 20 years ago, brought peace to the island of Ireland. I remember when I was small, crossing the border, and it was the most heavily fortified border in Europe, right? There was watchtowers, barbed wire, armed soldiers, everything. Now you drive from one jurisdiction into the other, and the only way you know that you're in the UK is the road markings are different. So, the violence has ended. More than 3,000 people died. Now, if you think, Northern Ireland is a tiny place, right? The population is under 1 million. So, and you imagine how many people were injured or whatever. So the scars run deep, and reconciliation is ongoing. So from an Irish government perspective, we're deeply concerned about our economy, but we're also deeply concerned about the risk of a return to violence. So that's kind of Brexit from our perspective. And there's a huge amount of work going on along with our EU partners, because of course, we negotiate as part of the European Union, not on a one-to-one basis with the UK. But there's a huge amount of work going on. And of course, our politicians are meeting British politicians. And
are you optimistic? Do you see a better outcome than what it looks like now? Because it looks very gloomy.
I have to say the risk of a no-deal Brexit is significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very significant. So, but I can't really predict what would happen, because, of course, there's been many twists and turns on this road, right? So, I would certainly wish to be optimistic. Like, there was a story that came out the other day that our central bank had a report which said 1/3 of Irish farms may no longer be viable if there's a hard Brexit. So, because of course, if you think about farms, like the border runs through farms, it runs through villages. People cross the border to go to school, they cross the border to go to work, they cross the border to visit their best friend, But of course, a lot of our agricultural produce, you know what it's like here, right? You probably sell to the neighbouring county. You don't necessarily sell to Morocco, So while we've done a lot of work to diversify our markets, the UK is still a very important market for us. It's not our most important market, as it might have been 20 or 30 years ago, but it's very significant, and particularly for agricultural goods, beef, mushrooms, that kind of thing.
What was the third question, Rose?
Yeah, so you're right. Probably when my predecessor spoke to you, I'm not sure exactly when it was, he was maybe just putting in place we have an Ireland-Kenya agri-food strategy, and that sets out how we will work in Kenya across dairy, potatoes and fisheries. So the potato project is the one I mentioned that's now going on in Nandarroa. So there's about, I think it's about 2,000 farmers engaged there. And the key focus of that is better seeds and better extension services. So having demonstration farms, showing the value of the increased, the value of certified seeds and better techniques in increasing yields. So that's happening at the moment. I mean, it's quite new. This strategy was only finalized in 2017. So the potato aspect of it was the first to be launched. We're now about to launch that Catalytic Fund I mentioned, which is around supporting co-ops. And the third element is the dairy product, which leads me, I think, to, is it Jared? Yeah. Jared, your question about what have we seen that maybe we could support, So I suppose a couple of things that we're working on. I mentioned the seeds, right? The better seeds and the better techniques. But this dairy project that we're just about to launch now, that's kind of interesting because what we're looking at there is actually the types of animals that Kenyan farmers are using. And those animals could be, they could be in another context very high yielding. But because they're here and they may not be getting the optimum inputs or food for them, their yields isn't as high as it is. So this dairy project that we're going to work on is around looking at, running some tests, like very scientific. We've got kind of top agricultural scientific minds in Ireland and Kenya working on this. We're working with Calro and Calro's equivalent in Ireland, which is called Chagas, which, is the agency that's led this transformation in Ireland. So they're going to be running a whole series of tests around different types of animals, different breeds basically, but then also different kinds of forage. So they're going to grow a whole range of like 8 to 10 maybe different kinds of forage, and they're going to try feeding the animals across a whole different one. So what combination of genetics and forage in this particular, in this Kenyan context, taking into account the climate and everything, actually gives the best yields to farmers. And again, there's a whole program around that of extension services, of demonstration farms. So through that program, we hope to come up with what they call an economic breeding index. So we'll be able to clearly show, what is the optimum inputs, what is the optimum breed, and then we'll try to push that information out to farmers to kind of empower them then to take those lessons forward. Because that's, you can, it's very obviously devastating if you think you're buying a great animal, but then the concentrates aren't really what that animal should be fed, and maybe this landscape isn't what they were originally bred for. So I think that could really be transformational.
Are you doing anything on the weather front, or maybe a way to capitalize on producing throughout the year, as opposed to the way we do it here, where we wait mostly for the rainy season and the rest of the time nothing is happening?
To the best of my knowledge now, and I have to be honest, I'm not the agriculture program officer, so there may be an element of that in one of our programs, but if there is, I'm not aware of it. And I guess, agriculture is so dependent on water, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I mean, in Ireland, we have sometimes too much rain.
Yeah.
It makes the island very green and obviously helps our agriculture, but sometimes we'd wish for a bit less.
Yeah. We wish for a bit less rain. Okay, so one question here.